Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're going deep, really deep, into the world of the Podesta emails. You know, those thousands of messages that leaked back in 2016 and really shook things up, politically speaking, of course.
Yeah, it wasn't just about gossip, though, was it? Those emails really give you a look behind the curtain. They show how power, influence, and lobbying really work in Washington.
It's like we're getting a backstage pass to see how the system operates, and for this deep dive, we're focusing on John Podesta. He's not just some random guy. He's been a major player in Democrat politics for decades.
Oh, yeah, huge. Chief of staff for Bill Clinton, ran Obama's transition team, then chairman of Hillary Clinton's campaign in 2016. This guy has been right at the center of it all.
Exactly. And to understand this whole story, to really deep dive into these emails, we have to start with him. We're using this video as our main source for this deep dive. And it definitely has a strong opinion about what these emails mean.
Which is good, right? We get to sift through all of that and see what we can learn from it.
Exactly. Yeah. Our goal isn't to say who's right or wrong about election interference or any of those conspiracy theories. We're not here to do that. It's more about using these emails like a map, trying to figure out the connections between corporations, politicians, these think tanks, and even the media.
It's about understanding the system as a whole.
It's about understanding the system. So John Podesta, his career is basically a how-to guide on building influence in Washington. And he's well known for his ability to handle, well, let's say, tricky situations.
He was like a cleanup guy, right? Especially for the Clintons. And you can't talk about John Podesta without mentioning his brother, Tony Podesta. They run this lobbying firm together. Very powerful.
So we're not just talking about one guy here. We're talking about a whole system of influence. And a key part of that system is something called the Center for American Progress. It's known as CAP, and they call themselves a think tank. But our force argues that it's really more of a lobbying firm with a lot of influence.
Yeah, you have to think about how these think tanks work, right? They're these groups of experts that research and propose ideas on all sorts of policy issues. But the way CAP is structured, who sits on their board, their donors, it raises some serious questions. We're talking George Soros, Goldman Sachs, all kinds of corporations.
So does that mean that because these big names are funding CAP, do they have a say in what policies they push for?
Well, that's the question, isn't it? And that's where the Podesta emails come in. Our source really focuses on this idea of a revolving door between CAP, the government, and these corporations. Think about someone who works at CAP, and they go work for a company that donated to CAP. Or maybe they take a government position where they can influence policies that benefit that company. That's the revolving door they're talking about.
So it's not just about the ideas themselves. It's about who's pushing them and who stands to benefit.
Exactly. And the source highlights some interesting examples. Like this guy, Scott Lilly, he was a former congressman. He was lobbying for both CAP and for Lockheed Martin at the same time. Lockheed's a huge defense contractor, and guess what? They're a CAP donor.
So he's advocating for policies that could benefit a company he's working for. Doesn't that sound like a conflict of interest?
Well, it definitely raises some eyebrows. And there are other examples too, like Spencer Burr, who was supposed to be CAP's expert on Turkey. Turns out he was secretly getting millions from the Turkish government. And then there's Rudy DeLeon. He went from a high-up position at Boeing straight to a similar position at CAP.
It's starting to look like a tangled web here. But how did the Podesta emails themselves fit into all of this? I mean, weren't they just personal emails?
Well, you know how it is. Even personal emails can be pretty revealing, especially when they belong to someone like John Podesta. Our source argues that these emails actually give us a peek inside the Clinton campaign. Like there are transcripts of those paid speeches Hillary gave to banks and corporations.
Yes, those speeches. Pretty controversial, right?
You bet. And the source claims that in those speeches, Hillary admits to having different positions depending on who she's talking to. One for the public and another for those big Wall Street donors.
If that's true, it's a pretty big deal. Makes you wonder who politicians are really working for, you know? Is it the people who vote for them or the people who fund their campaigns?
Now that's the million-dollar question in a democracy. And the Podesta emails, at least according to our source, raise even more questions about how those campaigns are financed. They suggest that there might have been some shady stuff going on, like maybe unlawful coordination between Hillary's campaign and her super PAC, which was called Correct the Record.
Hold on, back up a sec. What's a super PAC again?
Basically, it's a political action committee that can raise and spend unlimited amounts of money to support a candidate. But here's the catch. They're not allowed to coordinate directly with the campaign.
So are these emails suggesting that Hillary's campaign was working directly with this super PAC, even though they weren't supposed to?
That's what our source is alleging. And they say this goes against all those campaign finance rules, which are supposed to prevent any one person or group from having too much influence over an election.
So we're seeing a picture here where money and influence are all mixed up together, maybe not in the most ethical ways.
That's one way to look at it. But remember, we're just looking at it from this one perspective, you know? It's really up to each of you listening to decide how you want to interpret these connections. Do you see this as evidence of a broken system or just the way things work in Washington?
It's a great point. We're not asking you to just accept what this source is saying. We're asking you to engage with this information and form your own opinions. So we've got John Podesta, this ultimate insider, and CAP, this think tank with some, let's say, questionable connections. And now we've got these emails, and they seem to be revealing a lot of behind-the-scenes stuff. What's next?
Well, according to our source, this is just the tip of the iceberg. They say these emails also tell us a lot about the lobbying efforts of the Podesta Group, John's brother's firm, and how they work for different foreign entities, some with, shall we say, less than stellar reputations.
Okay, now things are getting interesting. We're talking about foreign influence in American politics. This is a whole other can of worms.
It's crazy, isn't it, how one set of emails, these Podesta emails, can spark so many different interpretations.
Yeah, I mean, you have some people, like the creator of this video we're looking at, who see these emails as proof, like hardcore evidence, that the Democratic Party is corrupt.
They're saying figures like the Podestas and the Clintons are basically putting corporate interests ahead of, the average person.
Yeah, and that's a serious accusation.
Oh, absolutely.
And, while we're not here to take sides or say who's right or wrong, it's worth taking a closer look at this point of view.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, they're making the argument that these emails show how everything's getting blurred together, lobbying, making policies, even how the media reports on these issues. It's all kind of mixed up.
Exactly. That's something that should concern anyone who cares about a healthy democracy, right? I mean, if those lines are getting blurred, that's not a good sign.
Not at all. And this is where things get really interesting. Our source points to this website called Think Progress.
Think Progress. Yeah, I've heard of that.
It's supposed to be this independent, progressive news site, but it turns out it's actually owned by CAP.
John Podesta's think tank.
The one and only. And if you remember, those emails seem to show Podesta stepping in to change a headline that was critical of Hillary Clinton.
Oh, yeah, right. So he was using his influence to control the narrative, essentially.
That's what it looks like. And that raises some red flags, Are those financial ties influencing what Think Progress publishes? Can they really be objective if they're owned by an organization with an agenda?
It makes you wonder, right? I mean, how many other outlets might be facing similar pressures?
Yeah.
From owners, sponsors, whoever. Makes you think twice about where you get your news from.
Oh, yeah. Media literacy is more important now than ever. And get this, the source also talks about how the Clinton campaign had this super cozy relationship with certain journalists.
Really? Like, what, taking them out to fancy dinners?
Well, yeah, sort of. They mention these Podesta Clinton fan bashes. Basically, these exclusive parties where reporters from big outlets like the New York Times, CNN, all the big names, were wined and dined by the campaign.
Wow. That's like that saying, don't bug the hand that feeds you, right?
Exactly. And the food in this case could be access to information, getting the inside scoop, or maybe just feeling like they're part of the in crowd.
Makes sense. So we're seeing a pattern here, right? Blurred lines between lobbying, policymaking, and even media coverage. It all starts to feel a bit, icky. Like, who can we trust?
Yeah, it's a tough question. And that brings us back to what our source keeps emphasizing. If these lines are so blurred, how can we be sure that things are being done fairly? How can we make sure decisions are being made for the right reasons and not just to benefit the wealthy and powerful?
It's a huge question, and it's not an easy one to answer.
Definitely not. But I think it all starts with awareness. The more we understand how these systems work, the better equipped we are to demand better from our leaders.
Exactly. So let's take a moment to just recap what we've learned so far.
Okay, so we've got John Podesta, Mr. Political Insider. We've looked at his think tank, CAP, and how there might be some conflicts of interest when those in power are so close to corporations. And then we've got these emails that seem to be revealing a lot of, let's say, questionable activities.
It's a lot to process, right? And remember, this is just one perspective, one interpretation based on these emails. It's up to you, the listener, to decide what you think about all of this. Do you see it as a broken system or just politics as usual?
That's what makes this so interesting. We're not here to tell you what to believe. We're giving you the tools to explore further, dig deeper, And form your own opinions based on the information.
Because ultimately, an informed and engaged public is what really matters in a democracy.
Couldn't have said it better myself. So we've talked a lot about the possibility of corruption and how money and influence seem to be all tangled up in politics. But our source also brings up some interesting claims about the Podesta Group's work with foreign countries.
Oh, right. They're suggesting that John Podesta's brother's firm has been lobbying for various foreign governments and organizations.
Exactly. And not just any governments, some with some pretty questionable track records. They mention Russia, Saudi Arabia, even the Maliki regime in Iraq.
So it's not just about corporate interests here, it's potentially about foreign influence as well. Now things are getting even more complex.
Well, it certainly adds another layer, doesn't it? I mean, lobbying in itself isn't necessarily bad. It's a way for different groups to make their voices heard, try to influence those policy decisions. But when we start talking about foreign entities lobbying the U.S. government, it raises some eyebrows.
It makes you think, whose interests are they really serving? Is it about what's good for America or what's good for these foreign countries?
That's a tricky part. It's not always easy to figure out the motivations behind these lobbying efforts or their impact on policy. And when you add in these potential conflicts of interest that our source is alleging, well, it gets even harder to untangle.
It's like we're in a political thriller or something.
Right. So many twists and turns.
I'm definitely curious to hear more about these specific examples of foreign lobbying and what kind of impact they might have had. Anything in particular that stands out from the source material?
Well, there are a few things they highlight. One is the Podesta Group's work for Russia's largest state-owned bank, Sberbank. They also talk about John Podesta's involvement in a deal that allowed a Russian company to buy a big chunk of Uranium-1, you know, that mining company with uranium reserves here in the U.S.
Uranium, that's a bit sensitive, isn't it?
Yeah, to say the least. This is raising some serious questions about foreign influence in American politics and how it all ties back to money and power.
It definitely adds another dimension to the whole story.
Yeah.
But it's important to remember, we're still talking about allegations here, not proven facts.
Right, right.
But even the possibility of undue foreign influence should be taken seriously.
Absolutely.
So we've come a long way from looking at John Podesta's role in the Democratic Party, haven't we? We talked about his think tank, CAP, and the revolving door between them, the government, and corporations. And now we're digging into this whole world of foreign lobbying. It's like peeling back the layers of a very complex onion.
It is a very complex onion. And as we head into the final part of our deep dive, it's important to keep in mind that these are just some of the threads that run through the Podesta emails. This source material offers a particular perspective, but ultimately, it's up to you listening to decide how you interpret this information. What conclusions do you draw from it?
That's what makes this so fascinating. We're not giving you the answers on a silver platter. We're giving you the tools to explore further, dig deeper, and form your own opinions. Because at the end of the day, that's what matters. An informed and engaged public who are actively participating in our democracy.
Couldn't agree more. The Podesta emails, regardless of your political views, offer a valuable chance to think critically about these issues, the kind of society we want to create for ourselves and for future generations.
Now, we've spent a lot of time focusing on the idea that these emails show potential corruption, how money and influence are intertwined in politics. But our source also makes some interesting claims about the Podesta Group's work with, well, some questionable foreign entities.
Yeah, they allege that John Podesta's brother's firm has been involved in lobbying efforts for different foreign governments and organizations, including some with, let's just say, not the best track records. They specifically mention Russia, Saudi Arabia, and even the Maliki regime in Iraq.
Wow. So we're talking about corporate interests, but also potentially foreign influence. This is getting deeper and deeper.
It definitely adds another layer to the story, that's for sure. You know, lobbying itself isn't inherently bad. It's a way for different groups to make their voices heard and try to influence policy decisions. But when it comes to foreign entities lobbying the U.S. government, it definitely raises some questions about, you know, whose interests are being served.
Yeah, I mean, it's one thing for American companies or citizens to lobby their own government. But when foreign governments or groups get involved, it gets a lot more complicated. Makes you wonder, are their goals aligned with American interests, or are they putting foreign interests first?
Exactly, and that's where things get really murky. It's not always clear what the motivations are behind these lobbying efforts or what kind of impact they have on policy decisions. And then you factor in these potential conflicts of interest, like the ones our source is alleging with the Podesta Group. Well, it becomes even harder to figure out what's really going on.
Sounds like we're stepping into a bit of a political thriller here. I'm really interested to learn more about these specific instances of foreign lobbying and what kind of impact they might have had. Are there any particular examples that stand out in the source material?
There are a few that they really focus on. One is the Podesta Group's work for Russia's largest state-owned bank, Short Bank. They also point to John Podesta's involvement in a deal that allowed a Russian company to purchase a significant stake in Uranium One, which is a mining company with uranium reserves in the U.S.
Wow, those are some pretty big names and some pretty sensitive areas, especially when you're talking about uranium. It seems like this is raising even more questions about those connections between money, influence, and foreign interests in American politics.
For sure, it adds a whole other layer to the conversation. And again, it's important to remember that we're dealing with allegations here, not proven facts.
Right.
But the fact that there's even a possibility of undue foreign influence in our political system, well, that's something that should be taken seriously and investigated thoroughly.
I totally agree. So we started by looking at John Podesta's role in Democratic politics, explored the influence of his think tank, CAP, and those potential conflicts of interest that come up when people in power have close ties to corporations. Then we went down the rabbit hole of the revolving door between CAP, the government, and corporations. And now we've landed in the world of foreign lobbying and the potential for foreign influence. It feels like we're peeling back the layers of like a really complicated onion.
That's a great way to put it. And as we head into the final part of our deep dive, it's crucial to remember that these are just some of the many threads that run through the Podesta emails. This particular source offers one specific perspective on what they reveal, but ultimately, it's up to you, the listener, to decide how you interpret this information and what conclusions you draw from it.
That's what we want to emphasize here. Our goal isn't to tell you what to think. It's to give you the tools of insights you need to form your own opinions. Because at the end of the day, that's what really matters, an informed and engaged public.
Absolutely. And that's what makes these deep dives so valuable. We're not just passively absorbing information, we're actively engaging with complex issues and challenging ourselves to think critically about the world around us.
So let's take a moment to recap what we've learned. We explored John Podesta's journey as this powerful figure in Democratic politics. We looked at the influence of his think tank, CAP, and the potential for conflicts of interest when those in power have close ties to corporations. We've also explored the allegations that the Podesta emails reveal a blurring of lines between lobbying, policymaking, and media coverage, which of course raises concerns about transparency and accountability in our government.
It's a lot to take in. And remember, these are just some of the many threads that run through the Podesta emails. This particular source offers one interpretation, but it's up to you listening to weigh the evidence, consider different perspectives, and draw your own conclusions.
That's what makes this so interesting. We're not giving you all the answers on a silver platter. Instead, we're equipping you with the tools to explore further, dig deeper, and form your own opinions based on the information. Because at the end of the day, that's what really matters, an informed and engaged public who actively participate in our democracy.
Well said. The Podesta emails, regardless of your political views, offer a valuable chance to think critically about these crucial issues and the kind of society we want to create for ourselves and for future generations.
Now, we've been focusing a lot on the idea that these emails expose potential corruption and the intertwining of money and influence in politics. But our source also makes some interesting claims about the Podesta Group's work with foreign entities.
Right. They allege that John Podesta's brother's firm, the Podesta Group, has been involved in lobbying efforts for various foreign governments and organizations, including some with questionable track records. They specifically mention Russia, Saudi Arabia, and even the Maliki regime in Iraq.
So we're not just talking about corporate interests here, but potentially foreign influence as well. This is getting more and more complex.
It certainly adds another layer to the story. Remember, lobbying isn't inherently bad. It's a way for different groups to make their voices heard and try to influence policy decisions. But when we're talking about foreign entities lobbying the U.S. government, it raises questions about whose interests are being served.
That makes sense. It's one thing for American companies or citizens to lobby their own government, but when foreign governments or groups get involved, it gets a lot more complicated. It makes you wonder if those lobbying efforts align with American interests, or if they're potentially putting foreign interests ahead of our own.
Exactly. And that's where things can get a bit murky. It's not always easy to determine the motivations behind lobbying efforts or to assess their impact on policy decisions. And when you factor in potential conflicts of interest, like the ones our source alleges with the Podesta Group, it becomes even more difficult to untangle.
It sounds like we're stepping into a bit of a political thriller here. I'm eager to learn more about these specific instances of foreign lobbying and what kind of impact they might have had. Are there any particular examples that stand out from the source material?
There are a few that our source highlights. One is the Podesta Group's work for Russia's largest state-owned bank, Sberbank. They also point to John Podesta's involvement in a deal that allowed a Russian company to purchase a significant stake in Uranium One, a mining company with uranium reserves in the U.S.
Wow, those are some pretty big names in some potentially sensitive areas, especially when it comes to uranium. It seems like this is raising even more questions about the connections between money, influence, and foreign interests in American politics.
It definitely adds another dimension to the conversation, and it's important to remember that we're still dealing with allegations here, not proven facts. But even the possibility of undue foreign influence in our political system is something that should be taken seriously and investigated thoroughly.
I agree. So we've gone from looking at John Podesta's role in Democratic politics to exploring the influence of his think tank, CAP, and the potential conflicts of interest within that system. Then we started digging into the allegations of a revolving door between CKP, the government, and corporations. And now we're venturing into the realm of foreign lobbying and the potential for foreign influence. It feels like we're peeling back layers of a very complex onion here.
That's a great analogy. And as we move into the final part of our deep dive, it's crucial to remember that these are just some of the many threads that run through the Podesta emails. This source material offers a particular perspective on what they reveal, but ultimately it's up to you listening to decide how you interpret this information and what conclusions you draw from it.
I couldn't agree more. Our goal here isn't to tell you what to think, but to give you the tools and insights you need to form your own opinions. So as we head into the final part of this deep dive, let's keep those critical thinking skills sharp. We'll be back after a short break to explore some possible solutions and wrap up our exploration of the fascinating world of the Podesta emails. All right, we're back, ready to wrap up this deep dive into the Podesta emails. It's been quite a journey, wouldn't you say?
It has. Lots of twists and turns, a lot to unpack. We've uncovered this whole web of connections, powerful people, corporations, those think tanks we talked about, and even the media. And we've really had to grapple with some big questions about influence, transparency, accountability, the stuff that makes a democracy work.
Exactly. And before we send you off to ponder all of this on your own, let's take a minute to revisit some of the key takeaways from our little exploration.
Yeah, good idea. One thing that really jumps out is just how influential John Podesta is. I mean, this guy has been at the center of Democratic politics for like decades, shaping policy, advising presidents, running campaigns.
The ultimate insider. And these emails, they give us a peek into how the game is played, all the behind-the-scenes stuff, the deals, the strategies, the messages, all carefully crafted. It's something most people never get to see.
And it makes you think, are the interests of everyday people really being represented in those backroom discussions? It's a valid question.
Now, it's important to remember that the source we use for this deep dive, they have a very specific perspective, right? They see these emails as clear evidence of a corrupt system, where those in power are serving corporate interests over the needs of the public.
And that's a totally legitimate interpretation. But we also have to acknowledge that there are other ways to look at these emails. Some people might see them as, well, business as usual in Washington, just the way things are done.
It's kind of like looking at one of those abstract paintings. Different people are going to see different things depending on their own perspective and their own experiences.
That's a great analogy. And at the end of the day, it's up to each person to decide how they make sense of all of this.
Absolutely. But no matter how you interpret it, there's no denying that these Podesta emails give us this fascinating look into how power and influence really work. They make you question the role of these think tanks, the impact of all that corporate lobbying, and even the potential for bias in how the media covers these issues.
They force us to think critically about the systems we have in place and ask, are they really serving the people? Are they working the way they should?
So the big question is, where do we go from here? What do we do with all of this information?
I think the first step is to keep asking questions.
Yeah.
Don't just accept what you hear. Dig a little deeper, look at things from different angles, be willing to challenge your own assumptions.
Because knowledge is power.
Yeah, exactly. The more we know, the better equipped we are to participate in the whole democratic process, hold our leaders accountable.
So true. And these deep dives, they're a fantastic way to do just that. Become more informed, start those important conversations.
Definitely.
Well, we've covered a lot of ground today, haven't we? John Podesta's network, his think tank CAP, those potential conflicts of interest we talked about. We even went down this rabbit hole of foreign lobbying and the questions that raises.
It's been a wild ride.
It has been a wild ride. And before we sign off, I want to leave you with one final thought. We've talked a lot about corruption, blurred lines, all the challenges we face in creating a truly transparent system, one that we can trust. But what about solutions? What can we actually do to fix these problems, both as individuals and as a society?
That is the million-dollar question. There's no easy answer. But I think it starts with awareness. We have to stay informed, engage in critical thinking, and demand better from our leaders. Support organizations that fight for transparency and hold our elected officials accountable for their actions.
Basically, be active participants in our democracy, not just passive bystanders.
Exactly. And change takes time, right?
Yeah.
It takes effort. And it takes a collective commitment to building a better future.
Well said. And on that note, we'll say goodbye for now. But remember, this deep dive, it doesn't really end here. Keep exploring, keep asking questions, and keep pushing for a better world. Until next time, happy diving.